going to understand the double negatives. But the point is, there's something to this. Will it be covered up? Maybe. We'll have to see. But there's so many episodes like this going on. And obviously, if the money is flowing from the Fed and was created by the Fed, they just didn't want to let anybody know. And they're siphoning it into other banks to save their historical system.
Well, while we're on this rather fascinating topic, it's a bit salacious and speculative, but still nonetheless quite interesting. I find it interesting that there are still people out there who believe in things like the Forbes richest people in the world list, which I made a mocking reference to recently to basically say that it's probably not the most reliable list on the planet. And I actually had someone email me to ask, where did I get my source of information? Who is more, who could possibly be richer than the top people on the Forbes list, or like Bill Gates or some of those minions that they parade out to the public. But on that topic, I mean, what types of wealth are we talking about when we start talking about the people behind the scenes?
This shows you the ignorance of intelligent people. You go back into history and you can trace the whole thing. And it's not easy. And you have to be a scholar to do it, or make yourself into one. And what you have to look at is the accumulation of wealth. Can you identify who owns what? What the British royal family has done for centuries is set up all of these offshore corporations and corporate entities that show nobody owns it, but somebody does, and their names aren't on the charter, and so on and so forth. I do a lot of banking in Europe, and I know lots about that. And who are the richest? I don't know. But I know that the royal family in England and London are worth trillions of dollars. Trillions. The Medicis, the Count von Thurn Taxis, who left us for the celestial life about 15 or 20 years ago. And he used to handle the finances for the Illuminists, this overall alpha group. And when he died, they were thunderstruck. He was only 62 years old. And his wife was about 25 years younger, and she was a ditz. And she didn't know one side up from the other. She's an ex-model. And not that all models are dumb, but anyway. And finally, they wrestled all of the decision-making away from her and into the hands of their professionals. But there's families throughout Europe who stretch back into the 10th and 11th century that you can identify their evolution of wealth, through financial dealings as well as wars. I mean, if you really study the history of the House of Windsor, you will find that in the mid to late 1400s, that house was taken over by the people who now call themselves the House of Windsor. They weren't the originals. These were people who came in 1348 who were kicked out of Italy, Venice, during the great financial collapse of 1348. And it didn't take them 100 years to take over the House of Windsor and become the kings and queens of England. And that's the evolution of that house. People don't know that. In fact, people don't know much at all.
Very true, but I don't tend to blame people for that, because I think that people have been, unfortunately, had it engineered out of them and drilled out of them in some cases, and have really had the stuffing knocked out of them by all of the various poisons that were being fed on a daily basis, both mental and physical. So I don't like to blame the victims for this. I mean, I think it's important to keep in mind who is really doing this and why people have reached the nadir intellectually that they have.
Well, I was pointing towards those like you and I who have had the opportunity and haven't taken it to discover, and they have the ability to do so, what really went on. And I think there's two reasons why they do that. Number one, they want to be thought well of by their peers, and they don't like getting dead.
Well, it's pretty blunt, but probably a pretty fair assessment of the psychology.
I see it in the newsletter business all the time. Some of these people know exactly what's going on. They won't talk about it.
Well, that's fundamentally what the real game is about. It's between the people who are aware and are going along with it and the people who are aware and aren't going along with it. And there's a vast mass of people in between who have absolutely no idea what's going on and probably never will. So it's the question of how to get around that mass and to the people who you can actually affect change on.
I think you're right. The others don't have time or ability to do and look into those kind of things. So they're going to have to take our word for it. And unfortunately, a lot of them don't because they believe what they see in the media, which is propaganda. And so they're happy to be able to accept that. And that's okay. You know, God made us all different. And, you know, why is somebody born with 185 IQ and somebody else with a 90? I mean, maybe when we get to heaven we'll discover that. But in the meantime, there's nothing fair about life. I mean, some people get enormous head starts on others. And so I accede to your idea. But this is the soft underbelly that exists. And I've talked to some of these people extensively. They didn't know I knew who they were, what they were doing, what their history was. They had no idea. And so I get a lot of information other people don't get. I've always lived outside the box. And I've got a very inquiring mind, and I want to know, well, why did you do that? And then you find out. You know, it's just like in the Middle East right now, the sale of oil by Iran is going to denigrate the petrodollar. And that's really the basic of what it's all about, their financial system. And they have a choice here. Are they going to go after Iran? I don't think so. The more I look at it, when I saw Zbigniew talk about the absolute horror of what will happen if Iran is invaded. Now, this is the guy that planned this whole thing. This is not somebody making a comment like me about what's going on. I mean, he knows. And he's decided that, hey, wait a minute. Hey, I don't think this is a very good idea. There may be no world left.
Well, absolutely. But the thing about Brzezinski is that he's been arguing that for several years now, and he went in front of some sort of Senate subcommittee a few years ago, back during the Bush administration, to basically say the Iran war you guys are planning and talking about is going to be a complete disaster. And he basically all but said that I know you're going to try to stage something, and we have to be on the lookout for something, some sort of fake justification. Not because Zbigniew Brzezinski is some kind of great guy, but because he's all about manipulating countries from behind the scenes and trying to get Iran fighting with China and China fighting with Russia and getting them to fight each other instead of fighting them directly. So I think it's more of a strategic thing from his perspective, but certainly his Machiavellian machinations just never stop.
Well, you're right about that. But I think he's been very serious about this. And I think it's one of the reasons why they've backed off on it over and over again. I mean, don't forget, the Ayatollahs were put in power in 1979 by these same people. And so the question, obviously, for a counterintelligence operative has to be, well, whose side are they on? I mean, do we the CIA and MI6, do we still control the Iranians? Well, I don't know that. But the possibility exists. And Brzezinski in back channel would be saying, hey, you control these guys. You can control whether we have a war or not. Don't. It's not going to work.
Well, that's some fascinating perspective, because obviously you're speaking with your own experience and having done espionage and intelligence back in the days of the old Soviet menace. I mean, what was it like for you finding out that the Soviets were basically, it was part of the system that had been engineered by the globalists and the Illuminists all behind the scenes, that it wasn't the story that the people were being told about the evil empire facing down the Americans or whatever. It was really more of a dialectic that was being created. I mean, from your perspective as someone who was putting his life on the line for that type of espionage and things, I mean, what was it like to discover that all those games were being played backstage?
Well, it started with my early discovery upon entering their ranks that the Second World War was a laydown, and that we had in part financed the two Axis powers, particularly Italy and Germany. And we let the fleet sit essentially unattended. I got the carriers out of Pearl and said us so the Japanese could bomb it, because we knew they wanted to bomb it anyway. Now, I said to myself, these people are worse than the mafia. And so I really don't want to do this. And for the next 3 years I did that. And I certainly didn't stay on. They were quite upset about it. And still are to this day, as a matter of fact. As far as the machinations, it used to be a joke that we would pick up analysis and traffic and things like that, and we'd send it on a landline to Frankfurt, and the hub of operations for counterintelligence in Europe during the 1950s, and after that, for that matter, was with the group in the IG Farben building, which incidentally never got bombed during the war. That's a real good one, like the GM plant near Köln. But all the traffic, all the analysis, all the code breaking went by landline. And, of course, if somebody broke into the landline, you knew it right away. So it was unacceptable, accessible. And they take it and put it in the bag and hop on a plane and head to wherever they were going, London, New York, Washington, and usually Washington, and to NSA and Langley, and which is the other subsidiary, the Central Intelligence Agency, and they would go over the analytical work. The big joke was it would get into the U.S., and it would be in Moscow the following day. I said to myself, you got to be kidding me. And so your faith in the system naturally would crumble. You wouldn't have any respect for the system anymore. And, different things like we knew who they were and they knew who we were. And on holidays, they'd go get drunk. We didn't do that. If we did, we didn't do it on the job. And they would send us our name, rank, serial number, and where we worked and what we did and who we copied and what intelligence we gathered, who was doing the analysis. It was unbelievable. They're spying on us, as was our spying on them. So it shows you how intensive that whole thing was. And they had a deal between the Russians and the U.S., you don't kill our guys and we don't kill yours. Unless there's some special occasion or something like, we got somebody in what was then Eastern Germany, and they were setting up radio transmitters, and the Russians caught them. Well, they'd have to fight to get out. Whether Western Germany was 3 miles away, and there was no brick wall. I mean, you drove from one place to the other like it was all the same place. And so, but other than that, there were no killings going on. Most people don't know that. And so you got to say to yourself, well, how come if the Russians and the Americans are at each other's throats, why are they making such deals?
Well, that's exactly the point, right? And certainly as the 50s slipped into the 60s, and obviously Eisenhower became aware of what was going on, and JFK, and there were more and more overt attempts to scuttle any sort of backdoor diplomacy that was trying to mend the bridges or mend the fences or whatever that phrase is. And we have the U2 incident with Gary Powers, where all indications are that was basically set up to happen so that would cause an incident. And all sorts of things that, again, just get sort of elided in the flow of history. But it's really fascinating to take a look back at those incidents and see how there really was that growing military-industrial complex that Eisenhower alluded to, which obviously was being puppeteered through the banksters, that was truly playing both sides of the game, as they always do.
That's right. And he couldn't do anything about it. He made one reference that I know of to it, and that was it. Because he was in mortal fear of his life. I mean, how far can you go without getting killed?
Well, I think we found out.
Ask Jack Kennedy,
Yeah, exactly.
So he had to be careful, and he was crafty at that sort of stuff. He was a good office manager, we'll call him. And most people have never read it. The book came out in 1948-49, War in Europe, I think it was, by Dwight Eisenhower. And it'll give you a good idea of how would you call it, a book that explained the war, but everything in there was in there because they allowed it to be in there. And all of the good stuff isn't in there. And fortunately, since that war, many others have written about it, and there's a lot of other books about it. But I read that book in French class, and shows you how excited I was about French when I was about 15 or 16 years old. And so, those are the kind of things that people have to look into in order to understand. And there are people who spend their whole lives just studying that period. But unless they get books that have been published outside the box, then they're not really going to get the true story. And, there's different factions behind the scenes, and they have their own territorial imperative, and but they're all working toward the same thing, total control of everything.
Well, that's what the game's all about, isn't it? And certainly, if you don't go outside of that box, and if you don't get that information from somewhere else, you're absolutely missing out on so much. And I guess we can certainly at least go back to non dare call it conspiracy, and that would be a touchstone for, I think, many people who owe so much of their understanding of the world from that seminal work, which you obviously had your own part to play in. And perhaps we can save that for another conversation, which I would very much like to have about Gary Allen and his works. But at any rate, perhaps we can start winding up this conversation by telling people about how they can read about contemporaneous and ongoing current events from outside the box by getting their hands on the International Forecaster.
Well, the Forecaster is about business, finance, economic, social, and political issues all over the world. And we publish on Wednesdays and Saturdays by email. Runs around 35 or 40 pages each time. And we have a hard copy that goes out twice a month for those who are not on the internet. And everything that you need to know every week is in that publication. You can get a free copy by going to theinternationalforecaster.com, theinternationalforecaster.com, or to www.intforecaster.com, intforecaster.com. For those of you who would like to ask a question, and we answer everyone, and almost nobody else does answer anybody, so we are very, very different than others. Would you like to get a copy of the publication, either of them? Or if you'd like to get a copy of our latest report on gold and silver shares, you can email us, and that address is Bob, B-O-B, at INTFORECASTER.com, Bob at intforecaster.com. And I almost lost my phone there. For those of you who would like to call in toll free, you can go to 877-479-8178. That's 877-479-8178. You can get copies of the publication. And for those of you who want to become subscribers, that's the place to go to. They have a special deal there. And you can get a full 1 year free subscription. All you have to do is talk to them about the deal that they're offering. It's really terrific. It was something that you would do anyway. And so with that, I'm finished.
We'll go there, yeah. Well, you're a better man than me, Bob, because I'm sure I get 1/100th of the amount of email you get, and I still can't respond to it all. So my hat's off to you for that monumental effort.
Well, those people who only get a one-liner, you've got to understand that I'm not Superman.
I really hope so. Well, at any rate, I'm very much looking forward to next week. So until then, Bob Chapman, thank you so much, and take care.
Well, thank you. Bye-bye.